I think everybody's going to be faced with situations that are atypical. So maybe in the Northeast we start experiencing flooding, or
locusts.
Yeah.
Rivers of blood.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Senior Editor Kiley Jacques.
Hello.
Fine Homebuilding Digital Brand Manager Rob Watzak.
Hey, Patrick.
And our amazing producer, Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Well, I haven't seen you two in a long time. It's good to see you both.
I know, I missed you guys.
Yeah, back at you.
What have you been doing, Rob Watzak? I hear you're making some progress on your kitchen remodel.
Yeah, so I think I might have mentioned last time that I cut a couple of cabinets in half. It looked like I just took like a machete and chopped them right down the middle. But I carefully cut them in a way so that they would mate up with all of the grooves and face frames and all that sort of stuff for the floor, the back, so all I had to do then was take the half that I cut off, knock the rails off and the floor and the back off, and the panel actually fit perfectly right against the old cabinet that was cut in half. So I was able to narrow rather than starting from scratch. It was like 15 minutes with tape measure and my oscillating multi-tool, and did some surgery to the cabinets, and it worked out great.
That's fun. It's there's something valuable about turning junk into something purposeful, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, I as I was pulling these things apart, like they're kind of cheap looking cabinets. They've been painted a couple of times over the years, but they have nice poplar face frames on them, and all the stiles and rails were all doweled together. Like whoever built these things, this was a time back in the 70s or 80s when people didn't expect the sort of aesthetics in kitchen cabinetry that we expect today. But at the same time, things were built really solid. So at least in this case, they were.
More about function. Yeah.
Yeah.
How's the family enduring the kitchen remodel process? Are they getting fed up with it and you?
No, they're actually really good about this stuff because they know that, in the end, it's going to be nicer for them. We boxed up almost all the stuff in our kitchen and sort of scattered around the whole first floor of the house. So if I need to cook something, I have to go to the den to grab some spices, or the dining room to grab some pots.
I have to say, any partner of a builder who is actively working on his or her home has no right to complain.
Well, I don't know.
Unless they're
making
a big old mess of it, but that's never the case with you. It may
I
be
don't
a temporary.
know. So I'm going to drag Andy into the mud here. I think Pat Steed has every reason to be impatient with the progress on Andy Engel's projects around their house.
Throw him under the bus.
Has it been like 35 years or something?
Oh, no, but you've seen her beautiful bakery that they finally built in the basement. That's
so
amazing.
Cool.
So.
Yeah, it goes well with the Luan plywood balustrade that comes in from the front door, right?
Man.
Andy just invited me to join him and Ben Bogey for beers on his porch post-pandemic, and I just can't wait because you guys have been talking about his house for so long. I just can't wait to see it.
I love hanging out on his porch. He's got like a big covered porch on the whole front of his house, and it's just like that's like the perfect kind of outdoor hangout space. It's just like it's big enough to have a table and some sofas, and he always has a fridge or a cooler full of beer out there. So
that's why I go.
I feel like those deep porches that you see in the South we don't have those as much up here.
I think,
and it's
all
a loss.
Houses, yeah,
it's really a loss.
I agree because it also encourages, community engagement with passers
social
by.
interaction with your neighbors, right? If they
really
see you
nice.
out there on the porch, they're going to talk to you, right?
Yeah.
That's why I don't have a porch.
I know. What am I talking about?
just briefly before we move on, we had a webinar last week with Tina Govan, the architect, and she really focuses on tying a house to its outdoor spaces. I mean, in fact, some of her houses are designed in such a way that it's sort of, that blurs the lines between the indoors and the outdoors, and it just really makes it makes for a pleasant transition from your car to your house, if nothing else. But it also just creates more usable space, especially when the weather's nice.
Yep. Kylie, what have you been doing? You been out skiing on the snow?
I've been up to all kinds of extracurriculars that have nothing to do with home building. However, I did notice something, so I'm coming to you guys with a question today. How concerned should I be by the fact that suddenly, or seemingly suddenly, I've just noticed that I can see the shadows of my rafters through the drywall on my ceiling? What's up with that? That does not seem good.
Do you burn a lot of No, you have a wood stove. It's called ghosting. Kylie. Okay,
well, tell me about it.
And it's because the surface of the drywall where it contacts the framing member is slightly cooler than the places in between the framing members. So because it has a little more humidity or water vapor there, the soot is sticking to it, and it's ghosting the framing members through the drywall.
That makes perfect sense. Now, what's the fix for that? Because I don't like the look.
Paint. Clean it, paint it.
I mean, do you think I haven't tried wiping it off because it didn't occur to me that it was like on the surface of the drywall. For some reason, I thought it was like an indication of moisture coming through.
I can tell you could ameliorate that to a degree by closing your wood stove door when you're burning it instead of leaving it open.
I have started to close it. I've learned enough at this point to know to close it.
You seem a little bitter about this whole thing. You were happier when you were.
Yeah, it's nice to see the flames, but I get it. Okay. Good to know. I'll just clean it. I'll try with that. I'll start with that.
So our paint expert, Rick Watson from Sherwin-Williams, says to use a little bit of Dawn dish soap is an ideal detergent for cleaning painted surfaces in your house.
All right. Thanks.
Jeff, what have you been doing? Do you have ghosting on your drywall?
I do.
Is it really common?
Yeah.
I've never noticed it, but I've never owned a home, so.
Yep, it is.
Yeah, I think being home as much as we have been.
Yeah, that's the difference, right?
Have you been working on your place, Jeff?
Not really. Worked on the snow thrower a little bit, but that's about it.
Oh, that's got to be fun. You got to share that with us. What happened?
Well, it started with the, how you've got the individual clutches for the drive wheels, so you can steer it. Well, they weren't disengaging, so I had to.
So what happens? Your snow blower goes in a circle until you can get it turned off?
Well, no, I can't. It
just the opposite.
It wants to go in a straight line all the time. So.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So it's basically just worn out bushings.
And you got it fixed?
Yeah.
I'm always dazzled by your mechanical prowess. I have a ton of projects to bring by for you.
It's true. You do seem to like to get into that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's because I'm cheap. So I'm not going to pay somebody else to do it.
Speaking of amazing creations with small engines, I shared with Rob this morning. Someone built a third size road grader out of a pair of old Cub Cadet lawn tractors, right, Rob?
Yeah, they basically took like a 1970s Cub Cadet like heavy duty garden tractor, turned it around backwards to use that as the drive system, and
built a grader front.
I mean, it was like 20 feet long. It was like a proper road grader, and the guy had a nice long gravel driveway, and he just gives one pass up and one pass back, and
that's awesome.
And Patrick said something to the effect of, that guy's got too much time on his hands. And I was like, well, if I had a bigger barn, I'd be building stuff like that every single day. So.
It was beautifully executed. I think you would agree, Rob. It was just a really cool machine. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a whole, culture of people who, in fact, there's a magazine people should check out called Farm Show. And it's all about basically people who live in rural areas, live on farms, showing off all the weird things they built usually out of pieces of other machinery on their properties.
We'll put a link to this thing on the podcast page because those of you who are into this kind of thing and intrigued by our discussion of it will be blown away. The rest of you, we're moving on. This comes from Jonathan. Not that Jonathan. This is another Jonathan. Lately, you've had a couple podcasts discussing the benefits and eventual conversion of all appliances, heat pumps, water heaters, etc., to electric in terms of efficiency and renewability. The logic behind it is sound and makes sense. The primary reason I hold back is utility reliability. I live in urban Minnesota, where it gets dramatically cold during the winter. I was outside in minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit weather this last weekend. Why do people live there?
I think it sounds like heaven.
It's fairly common to lose power about 1 to 2 times per year. Sometimes these instances happen during the winter months, and during those times, I'm incredibly grateful for natural gas water heaters and natural gas fireplaces to keep the house warm. The reliability of electricity pales in comparison to having never lost natural gas service during my 25 years living here. The solution to that is the addition of a local energy storage system, Powerwall or ETS system, or even simpler, like Patrick has done, a generator. Perhaps a generator should be standard and a standard appliance with every all-electric house. How would you address this conundrum? Well, Jonathan, I think you touched on all the ways we could deal with this. And I think, part of the solution is to make homes more resilient. Your house shouldn't drop below, freezing if the power's off for a few hours. Yeah, if it's off for a week or a few days, that's a problem. But if you have a reasonably airtight house with a reasonably good thermal insulation package, you should be fine for days with no heat, right? Am I wrong about this, people?
I think
it's not going to solve the water temperature problem, getting the cold showers. But if you're not going to spend the money on an expensive generator or an expensive power wall system, both of which to supply power for an entire house are thousands of dollars. There's nothing wrong with having some backup systems. Having a wood stove or keeping an old gas water heater in line, I guess, and to fire it up when you need it. If you already got one and you're switching to electric, why not hang on to the old one? But I'm actually really hopeful for the Powerwall scenario, because there's been a lot of developments in the past few years with these new supposedly solid state batteries that are going to be more power dense, safer, and I think eventually going to be more affordable, where they use like a ceramic core instead of a flammable electrolyte that most of the lithium ion batteries use these days. I think in the next 5, maybe even a couple of years, but 5 years, we're going to see a big shift to people having home storage of power.
Yeah, I agree with that. I can see that trend starting to pick up some momentum too.
Yeah,
it seems like the utility grid should have some reliability responsibility too.
Absolutely.
Right?
I feel like the situation in Texas has really shed light on all of this, and the need to diversify, like grid-wise, beyond your own individual home and what you're doing for backup. The grid needs to be backed up.
Yeah, for years we've been hearing about how our power grid is pretty antiquated in our country, and talk about power walls and battery storage. I've read a lot of articles about when there's going to be a lot more electric cars, and people will come home and all plug their cars in at the same time. There'll be the same kind of situation where there's all of a sudden this huge spike in demand for power. And I know in Europe and a lot of places they're basically building power storage substations to deal with that demand locally. So a lot of the power companies complain about. I don't really know a whole lot about this stuff, but just from the few articles I've read, a lot of the power companies, they have an issue dealing with these changing fluctuations in power coming from renewables, but the idea is that the future of that is that they will have local storage to sort of deal with that fluctuation.
And this, Jonathan mentioned too that he's never had trouble with natural gas, but that's not the case right now for many in Texas. So you can't necessarily rely on that. It's not foolproof.
So, what I don't know about this is at least as little as Rob knows about it. Is that the Texas gas suppliers were just didn't weatherize their infrastructure to deal with the cold temperatures and things quit working, and I'm sure that's happens. But seems like that, if you can make it work in the upper Midwest, in, upper Minnesota or Wisconsin or Illinois or what have you, it seems like you could do that almost anywhere, right? Those are cold places, and the gas keeps flowing.
It's just like we have to bury our water lines deeper underground up north. It's gas when it gets cold, and when there's a lot of volume of gas moving, freezes. Like when I run my forge even in the cooler weather, like in the fall out in my shop, I only have a single 20-pound barbecue grill tank, and my forge uses a lot more than a gas grill. The lines on my forge will actually freeze up just from the pressure or the volume of cold propane moving through there, because when it converts to a gas from a liquid, it releases a lot of energy.
It actually takes up energy, right?
It's
absorbing heat.
Are there any components for the transfer of natural gas that include water? I feel like I heard vaguely some mention of the fact that there were aspects of the delivery system that include water, and that's what was freezing.
I don't know. Maybe like a filter or safety valve, but honestly, I think we're getting outside of the realm of our expertise.
Yeah,
here.
right.
What makes you think that, Rob?
Clearly. I mean, it's interesting, all of it, to be thinking about.
Yeah. Well, I think the answer is there are no easy answers, and it's going to be a collection of things. If there was this panacea, we would do that, and we would know what it is. But I think it's going to take some adaptation on both the infrastructure side of things and individual homes and individual behaviors to make it all work.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
This comes from Andrew. Hey guys, in episode 323, a listener asked about replacing windows in a historic home. I've attached a link to the most historically accurate placement windows we have located. They will never replace a handcrafted wood window, but they do a great job of meeting the historical requirements of preservation boards. And Andrew sent a link from Heirloom Windows, and if you all are interested in a good-looking replacement window, I think Andrew of Soapstone Construction is entirely accurate when he says they're really good-looking. They are nice.
And I took a look at their website too. They have some really good detailed information on the insulated glass that they use as well. So it seems like a great option.
They look inexpensive, right, Rob?
Yes.
All right, you can count on that.
There's some things you shouldn't base
Cheap
on budget though, right?
Yeah.
Like if you're going to ruin the exterior of your home, that is that a good, use of your money? I don't think it is.
Mm-hmm.
This comes from our friend Dan Colbert in Portland, Maine. He's a builder up there who's one of the champions of the pretty good house movement. He says, regarding the addition question, this is in regard to someone emailing us and asking if it made sense to make their addition super airtight if the rest of their home was not. Dan says, there's never, that I can think of anyhow, a downside to air sealing. Think about a blower door test. You convert the number to air changes per hour at 50 pascals by dividing by the volume of the house. So by increasing the volume while improving the air seal of the new part, you're lowering the overall leakage. Also, you're increasing the comfort. The addition will be much less drafty. With regard to renovating old houses, I agree with the letter writer that you should seriously consider leaving things alone, especially irreplaceable pieces or assemblies. Unless you're a professional with experience in historic preservation, your replacement will be a pale imitation of what you tore out. And I have to disagree with Patrick on carpet over hardwood floors. Two of the central tenets of historic preservation work are reversibility and don't confuse the record. The carpet is obviously not an original element, and other than the nail and staples holding the tack strip and foam underlayment, it's easily reversed. Tearing out plaster walls and historic trim, blowing in sticky spray foam you'll never get out is a far greater crime. I think you misunderstand, Dan. I don't think historic carpet is a problem for historic houses. I think carpet is just disgusting. That's my problem with carpet.
Yes.
That was my takeaway when you mentioned it. Yeah.
Yeah. Even from stick with the wool area rugs. They look good over hardwood floors.
For sure. Yeah, that's the way to go. I think, this is good feedback. It seems like a topic that comes up again and again.
Messing up your old house is something that's really tough to fix later.
Yep.
Got to really think long and hard about changes you make to a good
conversations
looking
that
old
I've
house.
had. Yeah. conversations that I've had with Mason Lord, who Rob knows well, he's always talking about reversibility. I feel like anytime you're talking with somebody who's working constantly on historic homes, especially when they're doing deep energy retrofits or upgrading them for energy efficiency, they're constantly thinking about that. I feel like that's at the forefront of everything they do. I
sure see a lot of closed cell spray foam going into historic homes, and I wonder about that.
I think I think the people who are doing the best job are using it very sparingly. I would say the one place that I continually see it is around the rim joist. That seems like where they typically use it.
Yeah, or shallow ceilings where they just don't have the room to get any reasonable R value.
Yeah.
I gotta wonder if, a colonial era home, is there any occasion where it's okay to put spray foam on it? But I'm sure there are reasons to do it, but it kind of scares me.
You're a purist.
Have you ever tried to get spray foam off of anything? Oh my gosh.
It's a mess, huh?
When you get it on your fingers, it's there for 2 weeks. This comes from Shane. Good morning, FHB podcast team. Over the last year or so, I've listened my way through your entire catalog of podcasts, and I have enjoyed the journey. I currently work in O&G. So do you guys know what O&G is?
Well, I didn't until I saw his diatribe there.
I thought he just meant the masonry construction company in New England, but no.
That's what I thought too. So there's a huge gravel supplier that's O&G, right?
Yeah.
So I had to look it up. So there was a couple options that Google suggested. O&G, oil and gas, obstetrics and gynecology, organization and governance, Orton and Gillingham, which is a dyslexia treatment approach. And I actually said them in the right order. Anyway, so he's in the oil and gas business, right?
I thought he sent that information. You sent it.
I looked it up. It was kind of funny.
Yeah, I mean, since I'm not going to spoiler alert, he says something about wearing fireproof clothing, so I'm assuming he doesn't work in gynecology.
Good one.
I currently work in O&G, and for many reasons I'm considering a career change. I would love to hear a roundtable discussion on careers in building and building science. Of course, tradespeople are in demand: carpentry, electrical, plumbing, HVAC, to name a few. But what about a budding building science geek? I've recently built a small workshop in my backyard. I used Zips sheathing, of course, and now I feel the need to blower door test it. Several years ago, I had a bad experience with a new home and poorly flashed windows, which cost me a ton of money to repair. Not to mention they were in a 2-story, south-facing stucco wall with no overhangs. Boy, I wish I could go back on that one. That's when I began to listen to your podcast and discovered my love of building things the right way. So how does an educated but inexperienced person take the next step towards working in this field, and what paths might be recommended? Part of me wants to just buy a blower door test rig and see if I can make a few bucks, but what other paths may exist for someone who isn't necessarily a tradesperson, but not an architect either? I would love to hear y'all's thoughts on what jobs there are and will be in the future in demand. Thank you, Shane. Well, that is a great question, Shane.
It is. It put me in mind of a post that Randy Williams, who is a builder in Minnesota and also an energy rater, he's been sending a lot of blower door test related posts for GBA.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, he's really, but he is. Are you being sarcastic? They're great posts. He's a wealth of information. But anyway, in one of the posts recently, he shared the fact that having got an energy rater certification and diversifying his services that way, he foresees himself being able to ease off the physical requirements of being a builder, and sees this as a way to move toward retirement that is less taxing on his body. It's intellectually stimulating. He loves building science, and so that came to mind in terms of what this man's interested in. Shane,
that's a good.
Looking at certifications that you can get. I know sometimes people. Go ahead.
Randy got a BPI or a I forget what the other
is ResNet.
ResNet is the other one.
ResNet, right? Yeah, for her. Yeah, that's right, ResNet. So, but there are other BPI also came to mind, that there are these certifications that you can get that put you in the building science world where you're not breaking your body, and it's really interesting work, and you're on the operations side of things. Testing building performance. It seems like a good way to go.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely is a growing field. I mean, there was a time when it was only done by early adopters of high performance home building. And now it's, it's a requirement really for compliance with codes in most places. And, but also it's just a smart way to build is to have people doing this sort of stuff on our houses. Allison Bales on GBA had an article about just educating yourself for green building, and sort of talked about his path to getting into that. And, so there was like a little bullet list of some good things that he said. He said, find sources you trust. So, like Green Building Advisor, Building Science Corporation, just, look for people, a community and a resource of great articles.
And we should say that BPI, for people who don't know, is Building Performance Institute.
Yep. Yeah. And I think at a minimum, if anybody's interested in getting into one of those fields, either ResNet or BPI or some of the regional organizations that do that sort of training, are the first places to start to even get a taste of what it's actually like to work with that. Mm-hmm. And he said, talk to local pros, find people who are doing this kind of work already in your area.
And go work for them. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
If you want to do that, there are lots of contractors who need smart people who they can train, and building performance is one of those things that you need someone who can analyze situations and make suggestions. And if you give them a little training, they're going to be great at that job if they have some smarts. So, Shane, if you want to be in the building industry and doing high performance building or testing or diagnostics, whatever, just go do it. And even if you have to do it on a part-time basis or as a hobby for friends, or, if you can afford to go buy a blower door and mess around with it, you're going to be so far ahead of 90% of the people who are coming up in that field.
This just put me in mind of something Brian mentioned the other day. There's an entire new profession under development at this point. They're called integrators, and it's how to... they're helping people automate their homes and with smart controls. So that's another idea. I haven't looked it up yet, but I guess it's a budding field.
It sounds like all the things I hate in life is like computer software, making technology work.
It would not be for me, that's for sure. Yeah.
There's a reason you need those people.
Yeah.
One thing to Patrick, to your point earlier about going and working for somebody else, is that if, I know in our state and a lot of other states, there's programs that are subsidized by the state to do home energy performance upgrades. And there's lots of independent contractors that work with those state programs that are constantly looking for people to be doing these home appraisals. And typically they will have a budget to pay for training. So rather than going and paying for the training yourself, if you find a place like this, even with no experience, a lot of times they will send you to those BPI or ResNet classes.
I just was thinking about John Harrod, who is the owner of Snug Planet, and that's a home performance weatherization services, small company, business, family run. But I was thinking our listener might be interested in reaching out to some of these folks who are all active on GBA and very approachable and willing to share their experience. But, how did he get into that? Now he's writing for GBA regularly, so he's still diversifying what he offers for skills, sharing information. That's another way to go. Become a writer.
You got to do the work first.
You got to do the work first, right? But his business is really interesting. It's a neat model with a lot of services that are in line with what Shane is interested in.
Hey, if any of you listening to the show and you need a smart person to come work on your building performance situation in your business, get in touch with us and we'll put you in touch with Shane.
There you go.
Shane's ready to get out of O&G, and I can't say I blame him. Because I asked him about what it was like. I asked Shane if he was a native to southern Louisiana, and he is indeed. And he told me that, I was like, that must be really tough working in an oil field, in the summertime in southern Louisiana. And he said, The summers here are pretty brutal, 95 degrees with high humidity. I always joke and say you have to chew the air first, but our winters are mild and we can play golf year-round. On the odd occasion we see a few snowflakes every few years, the entire state shuts down. I work completely outside currently, so I'm not afraid of it. Heck, just not having to wear long sleeve, fire-retardant clothing would be awesome.
Yeah, can relate to that.
You know, there are so many people who work really hard in our culture, in our country, that you just don't really think about what they do. Like, we all just take for granted that you go to the gas station, you fill up your tank, you complain when it's like 30 or 50 bucks, right? But think about the poor person who's trying to get that stuff out of the ground, working in 95 degree heat with 100% humidity.
Totally.
You know? Yeah, and an asbestos sweatshirt.
I got a friend who used to work in oil fields up in northern Alberta. So that's the other side of the spectrum.
God, that sounds awful.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I don't even know, like, so at least in warm temperatures, you can open valves and get fasteners to come loose and stuff. If you're working when it's like 20, 30, 40 below zero, that stuff just doesn't work. It just breaks.
Yeah.
The flip side of that is if you're working in those temperatures and you're working really hard, you're not freezing, you're sweating. And when you're in a hot climate, things might be moving, but you're practically dying.
Have you ever worked outside for any period of time when it's 20 or 30 below zero? You're cold.
Not quite that cold.
You're cold. There's no.
But I've spent many years working outside. Yeah.
Okay, this comes from Taylor in Austin. Hey, FHB crew, I'm helping a friend remodel one of their 2 garage apartments, which were added by a previous owner. A year ago, the downstairs apartment was taking on water with every storm. We dug a trench to divert rainwater away from the wall where the stream came from. When the French drain solution didn't work and the water still came in, we noticed that the downstairs wall is not in plane with the upstairs wall. The deck, the only entry for the upstairs apartment, sits on the downstairs wall, leaving a 10-inch gap into the ceiling and the wall cavity. So for those of you who are trying to imagine what's going on here, if you have an exterior wall on the first floor level of this house, imagine you have a deck that goes over that wall for about 10 inches, and then the wall on the upstairs continues at that point. So the upstairs wall is actually interior of the basement wall.
It's like they built the top floor too small because you can actually see the tops of the floor trusses when they pull off some of the siding on the top of the wall there.
And in 20-some years of seeing wacky stuff, this is a first for me. With 20 feet of flat steel flashing and about 5 tubes of silicone, the deck boards were actually serving as a roof for part of the downstairs apartment, except the flashing and the silicone had both failed. I used plywood, tar felt paper, and roll roofing to create a proper roof for most of the problem area, but I couldn't figure out a solution for the walkway up to the upstairs entry door. It needs something that will take foot traffic, unlike roll roofing. Other than the obvious, don't ever build a wall like that, what can we do to enclose this space? I'm tempted to try something like what our forebears used, but of course do it right, or at least in a way that holds up for a few years until we can remodel the upstairs and align the wall properly. For my many days worth of FHB podcast listening, I want to say that there was a galvanic reaction between the pressure-treated lumber and the, I'm assuming, aluminum flashing. Or was it the acid produced by the drying silicone? Is there a safe way to have flashing in contact with the deck boards? I should add, there is a tenant in the upstairs now. All mirth and insights welcome. Keep up the good work. So, I'm always saying how smart the audience is of this show, but you people have got to use words that I know what they mean. Or
Come on, Patrick. So let me just explain the picture a little bit better.
Let's first explain mirth.
It's hard to, I'm looking forward to how you do that because it's hard to even understand it when you're looking at it.
So basically, here's what we got. We got a downstairs of a house that's 10 inches wider than the upstairs. So the upstairs wall is back 10 inches from the end of the floor joists. Then there's a deck frame attached to the ends of those floor joists so that the decking actually extended over the floor joists. and there was basically open space below the decking into the top of this wall down below. Now, what he did is he pulled up as much of the deck boards as he could close to the house, but he couldn't where the door was because the deck framing is so high.
And we should say that he did what like you should do with regard to leisure flashing. You have a vertical leg that goes up the wall, and it should be, you know, integrated into the water resistive barrier, and then it turns 90 degrees and goes out to the point where it goes beyond the basement wall, right? And there's a little downturned leg to get the water to drip off, right?
Yep. But the big problem was that right where the doorway is, because the deck framing was just barely below the doorway, he didn't have any room to add additional roofing underneath the deck boards where the door hit the threshold, where the decking hit the threshold. So what I would totally go for is, you know, Mike Gerton's got the article on the site-built deck drainage. I'd pull off the bottom course of siding. I'd rip up those first few courses of decking, including the one right in front of the door, and I'd run EPDM down the wall and out over the deck until it clears the wall below, and then you could put your decking back over the top of that. There's Mike did the article on it, and he also did more recently did a whole webinar discussing that process. And it's because the whole problem is you don't have enough thickness in that floor system to have normal roofing, pitched roofing, and decking in that same space.
I asked Carol about this last night because I was at a loss. I was like, what do you do about this? She's like, we fixed that. I was like, when? She's like, our house in Stowe, you had that one exterior wall where the foundation wall came up and the wall was interior of the exterior plane, right? So it was out of plane. And all I did was fur the upper wall section so it was in plane with the block. And it made the wall all one plane. And I think you could probably do something like that with this situation if you had enough roof overhang. But if you don't, then you need to extend the roof, then fur out the wall. And none of this is going to be easy or inexpensive, but no one should have done this in the first place.
Yeah, so you're saying you'd basically build a new wall out in plane with the lower wall. The one thing, he's got a tenant living in that house, and you'd have to at least move the door if you did that, because the door would still be in plane with the interior wall.
What about windows? Wouldn't that be the same for any? It looked like there were some windows there too.
Well, so you could move the windows out or use extension jambs, and doing the water management on any windows or any doors is more difficult than if you have them in plane with the exterior sheathing, but it can be done.
Yeah.
Nothing about this is easy.
It sounds like Rob's plan would be more simpler. Am I wrong?
It's certainly what he was asking for is a temporary solution until he has the means to build out the entire wall, because at least he recognized that building out the wall is probably the best thing to do. But I just feel like pop up the deck boards, pop off some siding, run some EPDM out a reasonable distance past the wall. And I think that should do the trick for the short term, at least.
Taylor, I'm going to close by saying, tell us what you do, because this is going to require some very creative problem solving, and maybe a hybrid approach of all our suggestions will get you where you need to go. All right, this is from Scott in Maryland, and it touches on what we were talking about just a little bit ago with regard to gas infrastructure. Those of us outside the vicinity of Texas have watched this weather-induced disaster unfold, and I'm curious about your thoughts on a common mantra that I've heard repeated ad nauseum. Texas homes aren't built for cold weather. I think that question deserves a lot more investigation and can be handled by your collective brain power. Plus, it'll be nice to get a break from some of the political shenanigans and just focus on building science. So setting aside for the discussion the fact of losing electricity and also a reduction in natural gas flows, and assuming those weren't an issue, is it true that Texas homes aren't built for cold? I think that's far too simplistic of a statement and merits a building science conversation among your fine panelists and maybe some ringers you have on the show from time to time. I've been thinking in terms of the three main aspects. 1. heating systems. Are the heating systems insufficient for extreme cold or just non-existent in some of the affected areas? Again, when electricity and gas fail, only a passive house will have a chance of retaining heat, so the house itself isn't the primary problem here. Maybe inefficient heating systems help overload the electrical grid. Does most of existing Texas home stock use 100% resistive heating, or maybe old heat pumps that are ineffective at the temperatures experienced? Maybe forced air heating with uninsulated ducts in unconditioned spaces destroyed effectiveness. I would say yes, yes, and yes. Yeah. So the heating systems are undersized for extreme cold events because they're designed for what is typical, even if the typical is the worst case scenario of a season, not a 10 or 20 or 100-year weather event, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. You got to wonder if as heat pumps get more efficient, because northern people are spending the money on these new systems that can deal with cold temperatures, where there's plenty of old heat pumps down south, because I'm sure that's what most people have because they're air conditioning focused more than heat focused. Mm-hmm. It's a combination of poorly planned and sealed ducting, but it's also heat pumps that just aren't up to the task of dealing with those cold temperatures. And I hope that as the old heat pumps start to fail, that it's just going to be just normal that we have heat pumps that can deal with those cold temperatures everywhere. But then again, it's like if you're in a climate that doesn't have as high demands, you're probably going to invest in cheaper products that don't meet those stringent requirements that a colder climate needs.
Right.
And once your heat pump is not making enough heat through a refrigeration cycle, they have electric resistance heating in there that takes up the slack. And you can imagine that the electrical draw on the grid from people whose heat pumps went into resistance heating mode, or folks who are trying to keep warm with electric resistance space heaters, or their electric range, or whatever thing they can use to make some heat, is really taxing the grid in a disaster, in a cold temperature disaster. And I totally think that the poorly insulated attic ductwork, which is typical in Texas because they don't have foundations typically, the ductwork's up in the attic, and that stuff is going to suffer in the cold temperatures too. It's just not going to deliver the heat that you need when your temperatures are freezing outside.
Yeah. I mean, it suffers in the warm temperatures too. It's just that because the delta T is different and those systems are more optimized for cooling than they are for heating, they deal with it. So they're still wasting tons of power in the warmer months. It's just not shutting down their entire grid.
Yeah. And a heat pump has enough horsepower to overcome that hot ductwork, right? It's designed with that in mind, that they're going to lose some of their cooling capacity to being in an unconditioned space, and you just size it accordingly to deal with that for summertime cooling. He says, so number 2, is it insufficient insulation? If a house is properly insulated for extreme outside heat, you'd think that the same levels of insulation would be pretty respectable at insulating with very cold. Please let me know if the raw fiberglass or cellulose insulation in any way is directional. It doesn't matter which side is hotter or colder. Insulation reduces heat transfer, right? Of course, water/vapor air barriers are a different story, but the insulation itself works regardless of which side is colder. Yes, it does. Of course it does, but they just have less insulation because, as Rob pointed out earlier, when you're primarily cooling, the delta T is lower than when you're in a primarily heating climate, right?
Yeah, think about it. I mean, if you're trying to get 90-degree air to 70-degree temperature, you only got to go, you go 20 degrees. But when you've got 0-degree temperatures outside and you're trying to get it up to 70 degrees, you got a long ways to go. And they're way more concerned with solar gain down there with shading and high quality windows than they are with heat loss through the walls.
His point here that he says that's. Can I just read this little bit, because I wound up reaching out to Armando Cobo, who's an architect in Texas, and he had a couple things to weigh in specifically to his point here. He said, are Texas homes, in fact, historically under-insulated because electricity for cooling has historically been cheap? That sounds like more a poor building practice than it is a problem with whether it's hot or cold outside. And Armando confirms that about 70% of all Texas homes were built before 2000, and most of these homes have little to no insulation on the walls and ceilings, and none of them were built with tight envelopes. So he says the quality of building in Texas is some of the worst in the country, and most builders don't have a clue about the codes, and there's no minimum licensing requirements. So all this adds up to, he's right. His point is more, it's about poor building practice than it is about, I mean, if you don't have the insulation to begin with, then, it doesn't matter if it's hot or cold, right? It doesn't matter what you're talking about there.
I'm glad you dug into that, because we're just sort of going based on theory than actual practice over here.
He also mentioned something.
Theory? This is physics, dude. What are you talking about?
What I'm saying is you don't have the data for how the houses are built in Texas. We're not referencing that. We're just talking about just the ideal building practices because of the environmental conditions.
I've been to Texas. That's right. I'm not from Texas, but I've been to Texas. Finally, he says, is it that house designs simply don't work for cold climates in Texas? Do common Texas house details work against us in the cold weather? Are the typical water, vapor, air barriers optimized for hot climates to an extent that it somehow defeats the effectiveness of the insulation? What about architectural features? I'd imagine larger eave overhangs would be prevalent to provide more shade, but that shouldn't decrease effectiveness in cold weather. No, I think it's just a matter of detailing the houses that are very much like the houses everywhere else in the country,
Well,
they're just not being detailed that way.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one thing that wouldn't work in New England that's common in Texas: exterior mounted water heaters.
Yep.
If your water heater's on the outside of your house and it gets below freezing, that's the problem.
Even plumbing chases at all, right?
No, but I'm talking about like they're actually mounted on the outside wall of the house.
Right.
But
it just made me think.
Your pipes are actually outside the house. It's not. That's not great for freezing temperatures, as far as I can tell.
I would say it's unfair to single out Texas as having homes that aren't prepared to deal with disasters, right? Or weather emergencies. Sure. It's, all parts of the country have their own problems. And Texas is normally hot. This isn't something that we've traditionally worried about, right?
Right.
Yeah,
but it would, what I've observed about I've seen tons of ruptured pipe damage from what happened in Texas. And, when the heat goes out in a house in a cold climate, the damage is localized because the pipes are in normally conditioned spaces. They're within the conditioned envelope of the house. So you have this cold spot and it freezes and the pipe ruptures. And it might be in a bathroom and it might run between, the 2 or 3 stacked bathrooms in the entire house, right? But it's not the entire plumbing system that fails and pours water into the house. I saw entire ceilings that were down on the floor with all the insulation with it, And it's because all the plumbing runs are up in the attic, unconditioned attic, and they all froze and they all broke. And that's just something that I think could be easily addressed. And it would cost a little money, and your plumber's going to be resistant to it. But boy, if you could bring the plumbing into the building envelope and figure out a way to keep the house warm, a propane a propane fireplace, for example, or a wood stove, or some other heating system that didn't depend on electricity, you could save the house. You could be comfortable and not risk, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars of damage. I just think it takes a little more effort to make homes resilient. Yeah,
and to your point, Patrick, it's like nobody's had to think about this before, or at least not in recent memory in Texas. I mean, or any southern state, where you just don't expect to have to worry about pipes freezing. So it's just not. It's not even something that people even think about addressing in a situation when they're planning a house.
In terms of backup options, as we were mentioning earlier too, what do you think the cost comparison? I know there's a lot of variables, but I hate generators. I think they're obnoxious, and everybody else suffers while you get your electricity. They're very noise polluting and stinky. So I just wonder, how much more is it to put in a wood stove or propane, like you were talking about, Patrick, a gas? What was your recommendation there?
A gas fireplace.
Gas fireplace, yeah. Versus buying a generator. I mean, are we talking, what's a cost difference there?
I bet it's a lot less, Kiley, than having a standby generator.
Yeah.
So I was described as what's called a portable generator, and it just moves around in the back of someone's truck, and you take it to more typically a construction site and run saws and compressors and stuff off of it. Mm-hmm. But a true bona fide standby generator that turns itself on and you can run the majority of your house or even all of it. Mm-hmm. I think they start at $5,000. So I'm pretty sure you could put in a gas fireplace for less than that, because they vent right out through the wall. They don't need a masonry chimney. They don't need a flue that goes up through the roof.
And they don't need to be tested monthly, and the likelihood that they're actually going to work when you need them is pretty high. And
most of them, as I understand it, rely on batteries for their ignition, and they do have ways to light them, I'm sure, with a match or a lighter.
I guess the difference there, though, that you have to consider is the fact that you're just getting heat from that. And with the generator, you're also getting, your fridge is working, you've got water. So it's limited in what it's able to do for you. But
that's not a panacea either. So, for example, part of Texas's problems was the stopping of gas distribution, right? So if you have a standby generator that's connected to the gas utility, it's not going to be any good if the gas isn't running, right?
Yeah.
And in the portable generator, what you find out is you can't get gasoline because the power's out. Gas stations can't pump gas, and there's such a demand for all the other folks who are needing it from the other folks who are needing it for their generators. Even if the station is running, they won't have any fuel because it's sold out.
Yeah.
Whenever we've had major power outages up here, winter storm power outages in Connecticut, usually you're hard pressed to find a gas for your generator within an hour radius of your house.
True. Yeah, I've noticed that.
So
too.
I think the solution is maybe propane in a big tank, and you have enough of it in there that you could go a few days. But those have downsides too. Now you need two, sources of fuel, and you have this big tank that you're going to have to buy and hide or bury. It's not easy.
I mean, really, the real question is this going to be something, is this going to be a trend in winter storms in places that don't expect them? And are they going to have to start rethinking the way they run their plumbing systems and other things in their houses?
I think that's going to be across the board. I think everybody's going to be faced with situations that are atypical. So maybe in the Northeast, we start experiencing flooding and,
locusts.
Rivers of blood.
I think the whole idea is what you said earlier, right? Like we need to be building for resilience, whatever that might look like, depending on your location.
Yep.
Jeff, what do you think about this? I'm sure you and I have been through long power outages. What's the solution?
Well, I think certainly in New England and a lot of the North, where there have been more power outages, sustained power outages, new houses, standby generators are going in as a matter of course.
Mm-hmm.
Power walls. Power walls.
Yeah. They're quiet. Non-polluting.
We got one more question here, and it comes from B. And B, you're a good writer. You write a lot. I'm not going to read everything you wrote, B, but I'm going to start off by saying, hi all, I need your help, please. We're doing our first custom home build in hot, humid Houston with a priority of durability, good moisture management, and good indoor air quality due to family members having environmental health issues like mold sensitivity. We're building a 2,300 square foot, one-story, full brick house with slab on grade foundation. The overhang is 16 inches. We're aiming for all electric and switching to induction cooktops, a heat pump clothes dryer, and ERV system in lieu of the standard HVAC system to help make this home more efficient. After researching quite a bit, I can't fit the puzzle pieces together. Unfortunately, we had already signed up with a draftsman and paid him when we found architects later on that would have been a better fit for us. Since we didn't want to start over again with the design, we just need some guidance and some decisions while still keeping budget in mind. Did you guys read all of B's questions?
I did.
Yes.
I feel like we need to select one or two to answer because there's
we could probably kind of blast through them because I feel like so B it seems as a scientist, and I could kind of get that from the analytical thinking. The analytical
what makes you
thinking
think that,
involved
Rob?
here, yeah. because there's some deep dives into some topics here, and I feel like in some of the instances we might be diving a little deeper than we need to, because I think we're trying to find some solutions to problems that aren't as complicated as they need to be. Like for instance, do you want to go and read some of these, or do you want to just start talking about them?
I think B needs an architect is the bottom line. She needs some design help. These are too many questions with too many complex answers, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you need a designer, and
Well, it sounds like that's how they started out, right?
a draft person.
They basically had an idea in their head, and they hired someone to draft up plans for them, probably without any, without really digging into the design details themselves and the requirements, So you've got a good point there, Patrick. But do we still want to address some of these questions?
You pick one.
So we're talking a lot of one of the. Let's see, what's a good one here? Oh, talking about the slab. So the house is on a slab, right? And B's worried about water management, moisture materials between the flooring and the slab. Now, the thing is, if your slab is properly waterproofed underneath and at grade, you're not going to have any moisture issues coming up through the slab. I mean, certainly when the slab is still green, you don't want to be installing new glued down flooring right over the top of the concrete slab. But that's hopefully in the course of the construction of the house going to be fine.
Is it common practice when you're pouring a slab, is the first thing to lay down a vapor barrier, a capillary break that she mentioned there, like the polyethylene membrane, that would go down first, right? And then pour?
What?
Where would
No, so the best practice is a capillary break of crushed stone, right? Mm-hmm. Insulation that is, not water unaffected by water. And then the polyethylene vapor retarder, and it should be number one, a class 1. It should be polyethylene because you want to stop that flow of moisture, and then your concrete goes right on top of the polyethylene.
Yeah.
Now, if she were to determine that the slab had not been insulated or poured that way with those measures in place, would one way to go about this put me in mind of Randy? It's like a floating floor assembly, I think, is what you refer to it as, where you put the rigid foam over the existing slab, you put the polyethylene membrane down over the slab, then rigid foam sealed with tape, and then 2 layers of plywood or Advantech. Would that be?
Well, so we're talking about a house in Houston here, so it's actually pretty common to not have any insulation under the slab at all in their climate. So and we're also what?
Don't
do that.
I'm not saying it's not entirely, but
the likelihood of it having insulation is probably slim.
But the thing is, we're talking about a new house, so we're also talking about that
you can do
they
whatever
should
you
hopefully
want.
have control over all the waterproofing details going into that slab. So. It's pretty common in slab on grade warm climates to have glue down floors right over the top of the concrete slab. So, whether it's tile or whether it's the vinyl flooring that B's talking about, or even some people glue down hardwood floor right over concrete slabs. But it's
is that a good idea though?
Sure, as long as the vapor's controlled, it's fine. It's just like stone.
What I was wondering.
It's just like putting it on a piece of polished stone.
That's what I'm thinking about. Yeah. Vapor.
Yeah, but if you're building a brand new slab, and you're dealing with that stuff when detailing those details when you put it in, like my basement is a thin concrete slab over soil. So there I have to do all those water management details on top of the slab or tear out the slab. We're talking about starting with a new house. If you've done all that stuff properly, then you can pretty much put whatever kind of floor you want on top of that concrete slab. And, certain floors are more sensitive than others, and there's ways to deal with that, and the flooring contractors are going to know that. So,
B, do yourself a favor, get either a design build firm or a designer who is going to be responsive to your energy goals and your construction goals. And you're going to need their help because, especially in Texas, the expansive soil situations, you need local knowledge to know how to build a house that is going to be long-lasting, comfortable, and not an expensive problem later on. So
termite
it's way cheaper to deal with it on the front end than to fix problems later.
And you know what? It might it might be hard to find an architect who will do this, but some architects will actually do consulting work. So they might be able to take your rough plans and turn them into something rather than completely starting from scratch.
Yeah.
In fact, that was a point that this came up. Tina Govan's webinar is coming up again because someone asked in the webinar that same kind of question, like, do I need an architect? And depending on the complexity, I mean, architects, it may seem expensive to spend the money on an architect, but when you can think about all of the problems they're going to solve and a good architect is going to solve and all of the pitfalls they're going to hopefully get you to avoid and sort of designing a more efficient house, when you think of the percentage of the cost of the whole house, it's going to be a valuable investment.
Where's Armando?
I was just about to say she should contact Armando, and even if that's not a project he would take on, I'm convinced that he would know
the right person.
The right person.
And the someone with the same energy mindset, right?
Exactly.
Not all builders and not all architects are going to be aligned with your energy and building goals. So you got to find the right one and make it a good fit.
And he's all about building science and practices, so he would know. So that would be a good starting point. He's very active on GBA and very responsive. So if B's interested, Armando Cobo, C-O-B-O, check him out.
In fact, even head on over to the GBA forum. I'll bet you could ask some questions for
that's a good idea.
For referrals. Yeah. So go to greenbuildingadvisor.com and go to the Q&A section.
Yeah.
We're a little over time, but I don't care.
Let's.
You have a meeting or something?
I've got so much to do.
Do you have somewhere to be, Kiley?
I have so much to do today. I've been doing nothing but Zooms.
I just want to do this one thing, and because it involves some crowdsourcing from our dedicated listeners. So this comes from Ted in Columbus, Ohio. He says, in the process of getting ready to submit for a septic permit and utilities, but I may want to hit the pause button because of ridiculously high building lumber prices. I've searched the internet for news from big producers such as Weyerhaeuser and Georgia Pacific, but was unable to find anything. I am well aware of the demand is up and home sales are up. COVID stay-at-home workers are actually working more on the house than their jobs. Big box home improvement stores what does that say?
He's saying the prices are validating that assumption.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about getting some of the producers on the podcast? I'm sure they don't mind ringing up huge price increases, but they need to explain why they are doing what they are doing to increase capacity. How about the feds and their efforts to solve this problem with Canadian lumber? Okay. Okay, Ted. I'm going to call the feds. They always take my call.
Yep. We briefly touched on that stuff with some of the guys from Huber during the IBS podcasts about, sort of the.
They were pretty cagey though, weren't they?
Yeah, I'm sure it's a complicated. It's a complicated thing. There's a whole supply chain we're talking about here. It's not just one product, And I was at Home Depot last night and there were sheets of plywood there that were over $60.
Oh,
I saw someone posted on my Facebook feed this morning that they saw a 7/16 sheet of OSB for $32, I think it was, at the home center. $32.
That stuff used to be like $12.
It should be like $8. It should be. They should give it to you, actually. Anyway. So if any of you listening have any knowledge about the shortage of building materials and the corresponding price increases and are willing to speak on the podcast, I would love to have you on and we can protect your identity if you want, whatever it is. But I would love to know more about this. And if maybe you're in one of the folks who researches, the commodities industry and have some knowledge about this, please, I would love to hear from you. I think a lot of our listeners have questions about what the heck's going on with material prices. I know I do. So if anyone can help out, or if you know anyone who can help out, please let us know at fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening to the show at Upside the Folks Find Our podcast. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe. Happy building. Keep craft alive. Thanks for listening.